So here's a quick replay between myself and Kaalhaarman, me playing as the Vampire Coast and him as the Vampire Counts. Now, usually, this is a pretty difficult matchup for the Vampire Coast because Vampire Counts can field the Graveguard and Crypt Ghouls, which will generally help you win the frontline fight. Vampire Coast, they do have some options here, and for this game I have opted for animated Hulks, which actually are sort of like cheaper Mourngulls. They do have armor piercing too, and just looking at their stats, basically the only thing they're missing, I think, is anti-infantry. Of course, they don't regenerate, but the cheaper prices are good. Now, to actually pilot this build, the general idea that I go for is I attempt to snipe the enemy Lord using my Spellcaster's Gaze of Nagash, the Gunnery Wight, and of course tons of debuffs. So Hornswaggle with Luther, and the lesser version from my caster. I use my Fellbats to distract the enemy Vampire Count Fellbats, and as for Kaalhaarman, he makes good counterplays by disrupting my Gunnery Wight using his Vargulfs, and also bringing in the Vargulf to support in this fight after he lands his Blood Dragon Lord. Although I do get some pretty good trades here. Now the frontline engagement begins, and I am on a bit of a timer since the front line will be winning this engagement despite the animated Hulks, who just help trade a little bit. And also the Vargulfs are going to be pounding away at my single entities. For Kaalhaarman, he is trying to keep his Blood Dragon Vampire Lord as safe as he can, and also gets in some really nice hits on my caster too. And for the actual main pivotal moment, at this point I do send in Luther to dive in on the Dragon Lord, but all buffs are essentially down at this point, and it's just a desperate sniping attempt. Now I have healed up my caster, but the two Vargulfs are now on Luther, and essentially this is how the game goes with this type of build. You'll have a lot of duels, and you're just trying to eke out enough of an advantage to pull out the victory. Now, for this actual battle, Luther does not manage to take out the Blood Dragon Lord, and with the help of the two Vargulfs, it actually turns out to be a fairly bad trade for me diving in there. Perhaps a better play would have been able to disengage instead, but I think Kaalhaarman's choice to land was definitely a very good one. As for the animated Hulks, you can see that they are helping the front line quite a bit. My zombie deckhands are holding a lot longer, and this means that single entity fights should be more in my favor, since I don't have to worry about as much, I don't have to worry about infantry as much. Now Luther, he does hold his own against other Dragon Lords. Of course he can't heal himself, but the casters can patch him up, and with my air superiority I do manage to take out the Blood Dragon Lord, which is definitely very good for me, and the balance of power is also in my favor because of this. But my caster is in a bit of a precarious situation, and because I miscontrolled Luther, I actually don't really have a ton to really fight off these Vargulfs. Every time I land with Luther, it's going to be a bit of a risky situation, and also a really nice unit from Kaalhaarman. This Necromancer, actually on top of his, I think, Balefire corpse cart, is actually reducing my recharge rate. And since he is in the midst of all of my units, I actually was not gaining any winds of magic for the entire battle. And at this point I am definitely feeling it, since I'm sitting at 4 winds of magic, 40 in the bank, and that means that Luther can't get healed up to kill off these two Vargulfs. And with that, them sniping out my caster, the balance of power switches into the favor of Kaalhaarman, and essentially, with my front line, although holding out well, eventually falling apart, it seems like this game will not be going in my favor, unless Luther does manage to pull out a miracle, and that is exactly what I go for. I land a very strong breath attack on the Vargulf, bringing it down quite low, but of course there are still 2 left, and Luther definitely won't be able to take them on. For the actual frontline engagement, the animated Hulks are beginning to fall apart, and given the fact that there are still at least a couple units of Graveguard they should be able to seal out the game. And now we can just enjoy the battle, watch as Luther falls. Although he does get a decent amount of damage. Small tech piece too. My gunnery wights have been supplying ammunition to him to keep his extra powder buff, which does increase his damage, but it is not enough. And the game does go to Kaalhaarman. Now, I think the big misplay, or the big play from Kaalhaarman, was that his Necromancer did actually shut down my Winds of Magic. He probably should have been a higher priority target for me to shut down. Luther could have attacked him instead of the Vargulfs. But I think it would have been a pretty difficult task, since of course there were 2 Vargulfs. For the actual dueling of the dragons in the air, I think I did a fairly good job early game, but after landing his lord and protecting them with his Vargulfs, that I think was the main play that tipped things in the favor for Kaalhaarman. As for the animated hulks, you can see that they all did fairly well for themselves, nothing insanely good. In fact, the Graveguard were outperforming them, although only slightly. They did manage to help win the frontline engagement, but in the end, that was not enough. However, I think this game is a fairly good demonstration of what to expect when you run this type of coast build against vampire counts. Sometimes it will go in your favor, sometimes it will not. But this is generally what I've been running recently, since it seemed to do decently. But anyways, enough stalling. That is it for today. I will probably be putting up another video like this in about 2 days, so look forward to that, and goodbye.